But freedom made them fugitives. She unlocked the chains of a captive Apache. Eliza Thompson had always been drawn to the quiet corners of the world, places where most people pass by without noticing. She had grown up in a small town in New Mexico, where the red dust of the desert seemed to settle on everything, coloring even the simplest of days. Life had taught her to notice the details others ignored, the shape of a cloud that hinted at rain, the sound of a distant horse, or the faint footprints along a trail. But nothing had prepared her for what she would find on that late summer afternoon in 1875, an encounter that would change her life forever. Eliza had been walking along a narrow, winding path that led to the edge of the mountains. She often took this route to clear her mind, enjoying the solitude and the quiet companionship of nature. That day, the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ground. The air smelled of sagebrush and dry earth, with a faint hint of smoke from faraway fires. As she walked, she noticed signs that something was not quite right. Small, hurried footprints led off the path into a thicket of scrub and bushes. They were too small to be a man's and seemed to belong to someone who had been moving in a hurry. Her curiosity was piqued. Eliza had always believed that the world was full of stories waiting to be discovered. She followed the trail carefully, making sure she did not make any sudden noises. The path led her deeper into the brush until she reached a small clearing. There, she saw a group of people huddled together. At first, she could not make out who they were, but as she approached, she realized they were members of an Apache tribe. Their expressions were tense, cautious, and filled with unease. Among them, chained to a rough wooden post, was a young girl. Her hands were raw and bruised from the iron shackles, and her eyes, wide and fearful, darted constantly from one figure to another. The sight of the girl, who Eliza later learned was named Ahioka, struck her to the core. She had read about the struggles of the Apache in newspapers and heard stories of how they had been captured or mistreated, but seeing it in person was entirely different. The girl looked no older than 15, yet there was a deep sadness in her eyes, a weight that should not have belonged to anyone so young. Eliza felt an urgent need to act. She knew that if she did nothing, the girl might suffer longer, and the consequences could be terrible. Eliza waited for a moment, trying to assess the situation. The villagers surrounding Ahioka seemed wary of her presence. Their expressions shifted from cautious curiosity to guarded suspicion as they noticed her approach. One of the older men stepped forward, his face lined with age and hardship. He spoke in a language Eliza did not understand, but his tone was firm, almost protective. She held her hands out, showing she meant no harm. Then, slowly, she spoke in English, explaining that she was a teacher and had come because she wanted to help. It took some time, but through gestures, broken phrases, and patient explanation, Eliza began to communicate with the villagers. They told her that Ahioka had been taken by a group of mercenaries from a nearby settlement. These men were cruel and had kept her as leverage against her tribe, demanding money and goods in exchange for her release. The villagers had tried to resist, but they were outnumbered and powerless. Eliza listened carefully, her heart heavy with concern. She knew that simply walking away was not an option. She had to find a way to help Ahioka, but she also knew that doing so would be dangerous. Over the next several hours, Eliza stayed hidden near the clearing, watching the mercenaries' movements from a distance. She noted how they guarded the area, how they spoke to one another, and how Ahioka reacted to their presence. The girl's fear was obvious, but there were moments when she looked at Eliza with a glimmer of hope, as if sensing that someone had come who truly cared. Eliza felt a strong connection with Ahioka, a silent understanding that she had to do whatever it took to free her. The thought of leaving her there, chained and helpless, was unbearable. Eliza also realized that she could not act alone. The surrounding villagers had been wary of outsiders, but now they looked to her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. They were ready to trust her, but they needed assurance that she could be relied upon. Over time, Eliza shared her plan cautiously, explaining that she wanted to create a way to remove Ahioka from the mercenaries' control without endangering anyone further. She spoke of patience, careful observation, and the need for a clever strategy. Slowly, the villagers began to nod, understanding that Eliza's determination was genuine. Her courage gave them hope. As evening approached, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The desert seemed almost peaceful, but the tension in the clearing remained. Eliza watched as Ahioka was led back to her small, dark hut, where she would spend the night chained. The girl's face pressed against the wooden post, her eyes staring at nothing in particular, yet filled with longing for freedom. Eliza's heart ached. She had known many things in her life, but she had never encountered such pure, unyielding suffering. At that moment, she vowed silently that she would not leave without freeing Ahioka. Night fell, and the world around the clearing became quiet. The mercenaries had retreated to their tents, and the villagers had returned to their homes, leaving the area dimly lit by the faint glow of a few lanterns. Eliza moved carefully, observing every detail. She noted the patrol routes, the guard shifts, and the sounds that carried across the desert. Each piece of information was crucial. If she was to succeed, she would need to be precise, brave, and clever. She also knew that fear could not be allowed to control her. Any hesitation might cost both her life and Ahyoka's. During the long night, Eliza reflected on her life and her purpose. She remembered her childhood, growing up in a world that often overlooked injustice. Her father had taught her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Those lessons had guided her many times before, but this was different. This was not about her. It was about another human being, someone who had been stripped of her freedom and dignity. Eliza realized that every action she took from this moment forward mattered deeply. The stakes were high, but her resolve was stronger than ever. Before dawn, Eliza made her way to a safe spot near the clearing, using the shadows for cover. She could see Ahyoka's hut faintly in the morning light, the chains glinting where the first rays of sun touched them. She whispered softly, hoping the girl would hear, "I'm here. You will be free, I promise." It was a small gesture, but it was the beginning of trust, a bond that would carry them through the trials ahead. For the first time, Ahyoka's eyes held a trace of hope, a fragile flicker that gave Eliza courage. It was in that quiet, tense moment that the journey toward freedom truly began. By the time the sun fully rose, Eliza had made her decision. She would not leave without Ahyoka. She would devise a plan, gather the information she needed, and risk everything to help this girl reclaim her life. The days ahead promised danger, uncertainty, and challenges that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But in her heart, Eliza knew that freedom was worth every risk. She had seen the chains that bound Ahyoka, but she had also seen the strength in her eyes, the same strength that now burned quietly within Eliza herself. And so, with the first light of morning, Eliza Thompson stepped forward, determined to unlock the chains that held Ahyoka captive. She did not know exactly how she would succeed, but she knew one thing. She could not turn away. Freedom had found them both, and it would demand courage, patience, and ingenuity to claim it. Eliza Thompson had spent the previous day observing the mercenaries in the small Apache settlement. She knew that rushing in without a plan would be foolish. Every movement, every glance she made had to be measured. She had seen enough in her life to know that fear could paralyze a person, but determination could move mountains. And she was determined to free Ahyoka, the young Apache girl whose hands still bore the marks of cruel chains. Early the next morning, Eliza began devising a plan. She returned to the clearing just as the first rays of sunlight kissed the hills. The air was cool and crisp, and the desert seemed almost alive with quiet anticipation. She walked slowly along the edges of the settlement, keeping herself hidden among rocks and bushes. She observed the guards, noting their routines. 2 men patrolled the main path to the huts, and another was stationed near a small corral where a few horses grazed. Their eyes were sharp, but Eliza noticed that they were predictable. They followed the same path every day at nearly the same time. Eliza knew that if she could use this predictability to her advantage, she might be able to create an opening. But she also knew she needed help. She approached the village elders, the same people she had spoken with the day before. At first they were cautious, their faces tight with mistrust. They had seen outsiders promise help before, only to bring danger. But Eliza spoke with patience, showing them that her intentions were true. She explained that she had been watching the mercenaries and had learned their routines. She could guide Ahyoka out safely, but she needed the villagers' cooperation. The elders listened carefully. They nodded slowly, understanding that Eliza had courage and a clever mind. One of them, an older woman with deep lines on her face, leaned forward and whispered in a low voice, "The girl trusts you, but the mercenaries will not forgive betrayal. You must be clever, or she will be lost." Eliza bowed her head respectfully, promising that she would do everything possible to keep Ahyoka safe. The elders agreed to help, offering small pieces of advice about secret paths, hidden caves, and areas where the mercenaries' eyes could not reach. Eliza spent the next several days preparing. She memorized the paths, noting where the rocks could provide cover and where the bushes could hide their movements. She observed Ahyoka, who had begun to glance at her with curiosity and caution. The girl had been deeply traumatized by her captivity, and trust did not come easily. But Eliza spoke gently to her whenever they met in secret. She told Ahyoka stories of faraway places, of kindness and bravery, and of the freedom that awaited her. Slowly, Ahioka began to respond. She would glance up from her shackled hands and offer a small, hesitant smile. It was a fragile trust, but it was enough. Eliza also needed a way to get close to the mercenaries without raising suspicion. She remembered that the men often drank water at the same spot near the edge of the clearing. She devised a story of being a traveling healer, claiming that she could provide medicine and advice for minor wounds. It was a risky plan, but it offered her a chance to enter the mercenaries' area without immediately alarming them. Early one morning, she carried a small bundle of herbs and walked slowly toward the spot where the mercenaries gathered. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her steps light and her voice calm. When she reached them, the men eyed her suspiciously. One of them, taller than the others with a rough beard, asked her sharply, "Who are you? What do you want here?" Eliza bowed slightly and spoke in a steady voice. "I am a healer," she said. "I have herbs that can help with minor injuries. I mean no harm. I only wish to help." The men exchanged glances. They were not used to women approaching them with such calmness, and the offer of aid intrigued them. After a tense moment, the tall man nodded. "Fine," he said. "Show us what you have, but do not try anything foolish." Eliza carefully opened her bundle, showing the herbs and explaining how each could be used for minor wounds or stomach aches. She spoke with confidence, using gestures and a few Spanish words she had learned from travelers. The mercenaries listened, still wary, but they allowed her to stay. This was the opening she had hoped for. She could now move closer to Ahioka's hut under the pretense of providing medicine. Over the next few days, Eliza visited the hut quietly, speaking to Ahioka in whispers. She told the girl that she had a plan to escape and that everything would be safe if they waited for the right moment. Ahioka's eyes shone with a mixture of hope and fear. She wanted freedom, but the thought of leaving the only place she had been held, even in chains, was terrifying. Eliza reassured her, explaining that they would use the darkness of night and the hidden paths to avoid detection. She showed Ahioka how to move quietly and how to follow her lead without hesitation. The two of them spent hours preparing. Eliza taught Ahioka how to listen to the sounds of the night, the movement of guards, the hooves of horses, the rustle of leaves in the wind. She explained that every small sound could either warn them or betray them. Ahioka practiced moving silently, her bare feet learning the feel of rocks, dirt, and brush. Eliza also instructed her on patience, telling her that rushing could be dangerous and that calmness was their greatest ally. As the night of their planned escape approached, tension filled the air. Eliza could feel her heart racing, but she reminded herself to remain calm. She had studied every detail, planned every step, and prepared Ahioka as best she could. The villagers had provided additional guidance, pointing out secret paths that would help them avoid patrols. The moon was new, and the darkness would be their cover. All they needed now was courage and trust. When the night finally arrived, Eliza and Ahioka waited in the shadows near the hut. The mercenaries had retired to their tents, and the clearing was quiet. Eliza whispered instructions to Ahioka, telling her to stay low, move slowly, and follow every step exactly as she had practiced. The girl nodded, her eyes wide but determined. With a deep breath, Eliza led the way, stepping carefully over rocks and fallen branches. Every sound of the desert seemed amplified, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. Each step was calculated, each movement deliberate. As they neared the edge of the settlement, Eliza paused to make sure the path was clear. She could see the faint glow of lanterns in the distance, signaling the tents of the mercenaries. Her heart pounded, but she remained focused. She whispered to Ahioka, "Almost there. Stay close. Do not make a sound." The girl's small hand found hers, and together they moved forward, blending into the shadows. Every moment was tense, every step a test of courage. The mercenaries were near, but Eliza's careful planning kept them safe. She remembered the advice of the villagers, following the hidden paths that wound around the clearing. The moonless night gave them cover, and the quiet of the desert seemed to protect them. Ahioka's trust in Eliza grew with each step, her fear slowly replaced by a cautious hope. By the time they reached the outer edges of the mountains, the first signs of dawn were appearing on the horizon. Eliza and Ahioka paused to rest, their breaths heavy but steady. The girl looked at Eliza with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Will they follow us?" she asked softly. "Huh." Eliza shook her head. "They may try, but we are careful. We know the paths, and we know how to hide. You are free, Ahioka, almost free." For the first time in weeks, Ahioka allowed herself to smile, a small, fragile curve of the lips that spoke volumes. She had begun to believe that freedom was not just a dream, and Eliza, looking at her determined expression, felt a deep sense of purpose. The path ahead was still dangerous, but they had taken the first step. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited, guided by courage, patience, and the unbreakable bond that had formed between them in the shadows of the night. The night was silent, except for the soft whisper of the wind through the scrub and the faint rustle of leaves underfoot. Eliza Thompson and Ahioka moved carefully, keeping low to the ground, their bodies almost melting into the shadows. Every step had to be measured, every sound controlled. The moon was new, leaving the desert in near total darkness, which was exactly what Eliza needed. She had planned this escape for days, but even the best plans could fail in the blink of an eye. Her mind raced with possibilities, some terrifying, some hopeful, but she focused on the path ahead. Ahioka's small hand trembled as it gripped hers. Her eyes, wide and alert, darted at every movement in the night. "Are we far enough?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Eliza shook her head slightly, signaling that they were not yet safe. "Not yet," she replied softly. "We have to keep moving. Stay close, and trust me." The girl nodded, biting her lip in determination. Fear lingered, but hope had taken root, fragile though it was. The first challenge came quickly. A horse neighed in the distance, and the sound made Ahioka freeze. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she considered running, but Eliza held her firmly. "No," she said, her voice calm but strong. "We stay together, one step at a time. Remember the rocks, the bushes, the shadows. We are safe if we follow the plan." The girl exhaled slowly, her fear giving way to trust once more. Step by step they moved forward, the weight of the chains that had held Ahioka fading with every careful footfall. They reached the first ridge that led away from the settlement. The path was narrow, flanked by rocks on one side and a steep drop on the other. The wind carried the faint sound of voices, but the elevation gave them some cover. Eliza guided Ahioka along the ridge, showing her how to step quietly, how to place her feet to avoid loose stones, and how to listen for danger. Every lesson was vital. Every instruction could mean the difference between freedom and recapture. Hours passed, and the desert remained still. Occasionally, they paused, crouching behind rocks to rest and catch their breath. Ahioka's legs were sore from moving quietly and carefully, but the thought of being free pushed her forward. Eliza kept speaking softly, telling stories of brave women and girls who had overcome impossible odds. Ahioka listened, her eyes reflecting both fatigue and admiration. She had never imagined that anyone would risk so much for her, and the realization made her heart swell with gratitude. As they approached a narrow canyon, Eliza noticed movement in the distance. A flicker of lantern light appeared, followed by the sound of hooves. The mercenaries were searching for them. Eliza's heart pounded, but she did not panic. She whispered urgently, "We have to hide. Quickly, follow me." She led Ahioka to a small crevice between two large boulders. The space was tight, but it offered cover. They pressed their bodies against the cool stone, holding their breath as the search party passed. Every sound of footsteps or neighing horse made their hearts leap, but they remained still, silent, invisible. Once the danger had passed, Eliza exhaled softly. "They did not see us," she whispered, letting Ahioka take a small breath of relief. The girl leaned against her, her body trembling from fear and exhaustion. "I was so scared," Ahioka admitted, her voice barely audible. Eliza nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know, but you were brave. Every step you took was brave. Keep that courage with you. We are almost through this." They continued along the canyon floor, using the natural shadows and rocks to remain hidden. Eliza had memorized the terrain, and she guided Ahioka along paths that were narrow, hidden, and less likely to be seen by the mercenaries. The journey was exhausting. Their feet were cut and scraped by sharp rocks, their clothes torn by branches, and their bodies ached from long hours of careful movement. But the thought of freedom drove them forward. Each step brought them closer to safety, to a life without chains and fear. At one point they reached a small stream. The water sparkled faintly in the darkness, and Ahioka paused, dipping her hands into it. "Water," she whispered, a mix of relief and amazement in her voice. They drank cautiously, careful not to make too much noise. The water gave them a brief moment of comfort, washing away some of the dirt and sweat, but Eliza reminded Ahioka that they could not linger. The mercenaries might still be nearby. They moved on, following the stream for a short distance before climbing into higher ground where they would be harder to track. As dawn approached, the desert began to change. Shadows stretched longer, the colors of the sand and rocks shifting in the soft light. Eliza led Ioka to a small hidden cave she had discovered during her earlier observations. It offered shelter, a place to rest, and a vantage point from which to observe the surrounding area. They entered quietly, lying low on the cold stone floor. The cave was dark and cramped, but it was safe, at least for the moment. Ioka collapsed into a deep, exhausted sleep, her small body trembling from weeks of fear and captivity, combined with the exertion of their escape. Eliza sat quietly, watching over her. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The journey so far had been dangerous, but it had also been a triumph of courage and determination. She thought about the villagers who had helped them, the lessons she had taught Ioka, and the trust that had grown between them. Each obstacle they had faced had strengthened their bond, and Eliza knew that the girl's spirit, though frightened, was resilient. She made a silent promise to herself. She would not let anything harm Ioka again. By mid-morning, Ioka had awakened, her eyes blinking against the light filtering into the cave. She looked at Eliza with a mixture of curiosity and newfound confidence. "Are we safe now?" she asked softly. Eliza smiled, gently shaking her head. "Not completely," she replied. "We still have a long way to go. But we are on the right path. The mountains ahead will keep us hidden, and we know how to move quietly. You are learning to be strong, Ioka. That is your greatest weapon." The girl nodded, absorbing every word. The journey resumed, this time with more energy. They climbed the rocky slopes, following narrow ridges and hidden paths that led deeper into the mountains. Eliza taught Ioka how to read the terrain, how to find small signs of other travelers, and how to recognize potential dangers. They encountered wildlife, small lizards, desert foxes, and the occasional hawk circling overhead, but no human presence. The quiet of the mountains was a comfort, a sharp contrast to the tension and fear of the settlement below. As they moved through a narrow pass, Eliza noticed fresh tracks in the dirt. Someone was following them, likely the mercenaries who had realized their escape. She motioned for Ioka to stay quiet and crouch low. They moved slowly, avoiding the tracks where possible, and used rocks and vegetation to hide their presence. Every sense was alert, ears listening for movement, eyes scanning for shadows, and hearts pounding with anticipation. The danger was real, but so was their courage. By late afternoon, they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched out as far as the eye could see, dotted with desert scrub and distant streams. For a moment, the tension eased, and Ioka allowed herself to take in the beauty around her. "It's so big," she whispered, awe in her voice. Eliza nodded, smiling. "Yes, and it's ours now. We can move freely here, but we must remain careful. Freedom is wonderful, but it can be fragile." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple, Eliza and Ioka made camp for the night. They found a sheltered spot behind a large rock formation, safe from view and protected from the wind. Eliza had brought a small blanket, and together they shared a simple meal of bread and water. Conversation was minimal, both were tired but grateful. The events of the day had tested them, but they had survived. More importantly, Ioka had begun to trust in her own strength and in Eliza's guidance. That night, as they lay under the stars, Eliza reflected on the journey so far. The mountains had tested their courage, their patience, and their determination. Every step had been a lesson, every danger a reminder of the stakes involved. But they had also grown stronger, closer, and more resilient. Ioka's laughter, small though it was, had begun to return. The chains that had once held her had been left behind, replaced by hope and a sense of possibility. And so, under the vast desert sky, two fugitives rested, their bodies weary, but their spirits unbroken. The path ahead was still dangerous, and the mercenaries were still searching. But Eliza knew that together, they could face whatever came next. Freedom was no longer just a dream, it was becoming a reality. The morning air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and dry earth. Eliza Thompson and Ioka woke before dawn, knowing that the mercenaries would not give up easily. A desert had been behind them, but the mountains were still full of dangers. Every ridge, every valley could hide people who might be following them. Eliza kept her eyes on the horizon, watching for any movement, any sign that they were being pursued. Ioka stirred beside her, her small face showing both fear and determination. She had begun to understand the stakes. They were fugitives now, moving through the wilderness with only each other to trust. They packed their few belongings quietly, careful not to make any noise that could alert distant ears. Bread, water, and a small bundle of herbs were all they carried. Every ounce mattered. Eliza led the way, guiding Ioka through a narrow path along the mountainside. The ground was uneven with loose stones that could slide underfoot. One wrong step could send them tumbling, but Eliza moved confidently, showing Ahioka how to place her feet, how to test the ground before stepping, and how to maintain balance even when exhaustion threatened to take over. The first signs of danger came sooner than expected. Far below, they could see faint movements, figures on horseback moving across the valley. Eliza squinted, estimating the distance. "They are following us," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension. Ahioka froze for a moment, fear rising in her chest. "Will they catch us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eliza knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No," she said firmly. "We are careful, and we know the paths. They may try, but we are faster, and we are smarter. Stay close and trust me." The pursuit made every decision critical. Eliza led Ahioka through narrow gullies and hidden caves, places where the riders could not follow. The terrain was difficult, with steep inclines, sharp rocks, and thick brush that scratched at their clothes and skin. Each step tested their endurance, but they had to keep moving. Even a moment of hesitation could allow the mercenaries to close the distance. The sound of distant hoofbeats reminded them that the danger was real and ever-present. At one point they reached a small stream that twisted through the canyon. The water was cold and clear, and Ioka dipped her hands in, drinking slowly. "We can rest for a moment," Eliza whispered, "but not long. They are still out there." Ioka nodded, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. The stream gave them a brief comfort, a reminder that nature could also be an ally. Eliza encouraged the girl to wash her face and arms to remove some of the sweat and dust that clung to her skin. Even small acts of cleanliness lifted their spirits and strengthened their resolve. As the day progressed, the sun climbed higher, turning the rocks hot and making every movement more exhausting. Eliza and Ahioka had to find shade wherever they could, hiding behind large boulders or in small caves along the mountainside. They used the natural features of the land to stay out of sight, and every step was planned to avoid leaving tracks that could be followed. The mercenaries were skilled, but Eliza's careful observation of the terrain gave them a crucial advantage. During one tense moment, they came across a narrow ridge that overlooked the valley below. Eliza crouched, signaling Ioka to do the same. Through the morning haze, they could see the mercenaries' figures moving slowly across the valley floor. Horses kicked up dust, and the riders called out to each other, frustrated at the trail they had lost. Eliza whispered, "They don't know we are here. If we wait until noon, the sun will be behind us and we can move across the ridge without being seen." Ahioka nodded, understanding the need for patience, even though her legs ached and her stomach growled with hunger. Hours passed slowly as they rested in the shadows. Eliza used the time to teach Ahioka more survival skills. She showed her how to read the sky for weather changes, how to find edible plants and roots, and how to move quietly even when tired. Every lesson was crucial. Ahioka listened attentively, her small hands brushing away leaves and dirt as she practiced what Eliza taught her. The bond between them grew stronger with every shared lesson, every whispered word, every cautious glance exchanged in the silence of the mountains. By late afternoon, Eliza decided it was time to continue. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. They moved carefully along a narrow path that led deeper into the mountains. The ridge was steep, and the drop on one side was sharp. Ahioka clung to Eliza's hand, her trust unwavering now. "We are almost safe," Eliza said, though she knew that dangers still lay ahead. Every step had to be deliberate, every movement calculated. Suddenly, a voice echoed from below. "There they are!" Eliza froze, and Ahioka pressed herself close. Figures on horseback were climbing the slope at an angle that could bring them dangerously close. Eliza's mind raced. They could not outrun the riders on the narrow ridge. They would be forced off balance, or worse. She quickly scanned the rocks above them and noticed a small crevice hidden behind a cluster of boulders. "This way," she whispered urgently, leading Ahioka toward the narrow opening. They squeezed into the tight space, lying flat against the cold stone. The mercenaries passed within a few feet of them, shouting to each other and kicking up dust. The sound of hooves echoed in the canyon, but Eliza and Ahioka remained perfectly still. Ahioka's breathing was shallow, her small body tense, but Eliza held her hand, offering silent reassurance. After what felt like an eternity, the riders moved past, unaware of the fugitives hiding just above them. Eliza exhaled quietly. "We are still safe," she said softly. "But we must move quickly while they are distracted." Night fell, bringing cooler air and a blanket of stars. Eliza led Ayoka through the darkness, using the cover of night to their advantage. They moved along a hidden trail that twisted through the mountains, following the directions given by the villagers. The path was difficult, with loose stones and sharp rocks, but it was their only way to put distance between themselves and the mercenaries. Ahioka stumbled occasionally, but Eliza's steady hand kept her upright. Each step brought them closer to safety, closer to the freedom that had seemed so distant just days before. During a brief rest under a large boulder, Ahioka spoke softly. "Do you think they will ever stop looking for me?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Eliza smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "They may try," she said, "but we are clever, and we know the land. The mountains are on our side. And you are strong, Ahioka. Never forget that." The girl nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and hope. She was learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. The following days were a test of endurance. Eliza and Ahioka navigated treacherous cliffs, crossed small streams, and avoided areas where the mercenaries might be hiding. They ate sparingly, using small pieces of bread and edible plants to maintain their strength. Sleep was minimal, and every sound carried the potential for danger. Yet, through it all, they grew closer. Ahioka began to speak more freely, sharing stories of her family, her life in the village, and the traditions she cherished. Eliza listened, offering comfort and encouragement. The girl's spirit, once broken, began to shine again. One evening, as the sun set behind distant peaks, Eliza and Ahioka found a hidden cave that offered both shelter and a view of the surrounding valley. They rested there, sharing a simple meal and speaking quietly about the journey ahead. The mercenaries were still searching, but Eliza's careful planning and the natural obstacles of the mountains had kept them safe. Ahioka's eyes glowed with determination, and Eliza knew that the girl's courage would see them through the final challenges. As they lay beneath the stars, Eliza reflected on the journey so far. The mountains had tested them in ways she could not have imagined. Fear, exhaustion, and danger had been constant companions, but they had also revealed strength, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between two unlikely allies. Ahioka was no longer just a frightened girl in chains. She was a survivor, learning to trust herself and the world around her. And Eliza, guiding her every step, had found purpose in helping the girl reclaim her life. The pursuit would continue, and the path ahead would not be easy. But for the first time, both of them understood that freedom was within reach. Every step they took, every choice they made, brought them closer to a life without fear. And in the quiet of the mountains, under the vast sky filled with stars, they rested, gathering strength for the final stages of their journey.